Hey guys and gals, thanks for watching this episode of Tech Talk. Today we are filming this and broadcasting it as if it's alive because we're all out on the Rubicon for Jeepers Jamboree. However, I still have a whole bunch of things for you, including my first tech tip, which is going to be hot weather. If you're running your Jeep and it's getting hot, the temperature keeps increasing, I've got a couple tips for you. One is turn on the heater. The heater is another core, a small radiator, that can actually go ahead and start pulling heat out. Now you do not only switching it over to the heater, but you need to turn the fan on to help it dissipate out some of the heat. The next thing I want you to do is be cognizant of which way the wind is blowing and turn your vehicle into the wind. Make sure you're getting air coming through the radiator. A lot of the time, what happens is you're driving up a hill or a canyon and you're going with the wind, so very little air is actually coming through the radiator. You want to turn around and get that airflow coming through. Do not shut off the vehicle. You need the water pump running, circulating the air. When you bring it down to idle, the fans and the radiator, the cooling system, should have a chance to catch up. You don't want your vehicle to overheat. It will warp the head, and then you're going to have all kinds of other problems. So mind that temperature. When it's hot outside like this, make sure your vehicle is not overheating. You're just going to wreck the engine, and you got to keep an eye on that. All right, next we're going to talk about upgrading your brakes, maintaining your brakes, and we're going to show you how. All right, today we're going to change my rotors and pads, and I've already inspected them, so I know that they need to be changed, but this would be an important part of the process that you would do as part of looking at your brakes, or if you know they're old and need to be replaced, or if you just say, no way, I want to put in better rotors and pads. So the first thing you'll do is you'll pop the wheel off. Right, I've got a impact gun, but the next thing that you do now is you'd actually inspect the rotor. So my previous rotor had damage. And it was worn, it had, got rocks in it, and those were embedded into the brake pads. So we're going to go ahead and just show you what it looks like to pull this apart. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take off the caliper. Now this could be done with an impact, or you can use a ratchet wrench. There's a couple of bolts that hold the caliper in place. Depending on the caliper you have, this may look different where the bolts are. They might be on the back. They might be Allen heads, they might be 10 millimeters. So, and by the way, anything you're taking apart, whether it's the lug nuts, the brake caliper, if anything's loose, I want you to be alarmed, okay? It is very common for caliper bolts to get loose or fall out because this is heating and contracting. So you want to make sure that that's not yours, okay? Careful to set the caliper aside and do not let it hang from the brake line. You can use a piece of wire or a bungee or a zip tie to hold the caliper up. Mine happens to balance quite nicely right there. Then you're going to go ahead and take the rotor off. Now, I recommend that you get yourself a soft, this is called a dead blow mallet, but something soft that you can tap on this. You don't want a metal-to-metal hammer or you'll damage the rotor. If you don't care about it, you can use a metal-to-metal hammer, that's fine. But you're gonna, just kind of tap on this thing and work it so that it comes off. You can see that mine spins nice. That's a good spin. It's kind of a chance to check your wheel bearings too, and then you'll pull the rotor off. So now that we've got this apart, I typically clean this if it's dirty, inspect the threads on the studs, make sure everything looks good. Like I showed you, you want to check that wheel bearing, make sure it's still good, and just give everything a visual look at your brake lines, make sure there's no leaks, kind of the obvious stuff. All right, now that I've got the rotor over here on the bench, I can see that there's a deep groove, so a rock got lodged between the brake pad and the rotor and damaged the rotor. This needs to be replaced. This is going to deteriorate the performance. You can see that the brake pad has the matching scar in it where something got caught in there, And this is important that these things get replaced. And I've actually chosen, I'm going to upgrade the brake pad material. So it's a good time to change compounds and try something a little bit different, maybe may work even better. The other thing I want to notice while I got this off is I have marked everything which side it came off of. I marked the brake pads as they came out, and I also marked the outside one versus the inside one. So just mark everything as you take it apart so that you know which side it would go back on. It's important to note that these rotors, that not only do the slots go a certain way, but so do the vanes for cooling inside the rotor. And you want to make sure you get the proper side back on. It's really easy to get these parts mixed up, so make sure you mark everything. Just in case you get them mixed up, the slots for the driver's side actually go forward and the vanes go backwards. So just for reference, you'll want to do the same thing on the other side for the passenger. The theory behind the vanes going that way is that they create a vacuum. So it actually pulls cool air in over the wheel bearing, pulls it out through the rotor and past the caliper because hot air rises. So it's just simple, and that's the way it works, and it works really well. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is your stock rotor probably looks something more like this, where it's a solid rotor. It's typically vented down the middle, but it's all one piece, right? These are fine. They have good braking surface on here. It's what's been used for years and years. I've upgraded to a lighter weight version where it's a two-piece. So the center comes out, it's aluminum, and then only the outside is the heavier cast iron. I've also upgraded to the slotted style where as it rotates, it's actually pulling the dirt and debris out away from the brake pads. Now R1 also offers a drilled one, but I opt just for the slotted because the drilled takes away from the surface area that the brake pads are clamping to. The drilled is really for the guy who is doing racing, wants a lighter weight package, and they're prepared to burn through these things and throw them away. You probably want a little bit more life out of yours, so solid or slotted is the way to go. All right, next what you're going to want to do is refer to your owner's manual, go to the brake section. This is going to tell you all of the factory specs that you need to know. So it'll tell you how thick the brake pads can be or how thin they can be before you have to replace them. Same with the thickness of the rotor. That's going to require a simple caliper that you can get at Harbor Freight or Home Depot that looks something like this. This one happens to be a digital one, but they're relatively inexpensive now. And this will also tell you the sequence in which you need to take yours apart and put it back together, and the torque ratings. So very important that you're able to reference this. If you don't have the book, look it up online, print it out, whatever you need to do to make sure you know what those specs are. Again, if you're just replacing them, the only thing you need to know in here is what the torque specs are to put it back together. And like I said before, if things were loose when you took them apart, that's not good either. That means you need to keep a closer eye on those bolts holding this thing together. Okay, so here's my old brake pad, and I'm going to check it. It's 585 thousandths, and the new brake pad is 685 thousandths. So I wore about 100 thousandths off the thickness. It still has plenty, but I'm going to change compounds. So this was a lower dust, longer life pad, and now I'm putting in a more aggressive brake pad that will come on at a cooler temperature and brake much quicker. Now the downside with this is it's going to wear the rotor much faster. So if you're driving a lot of miles, then you want this kind of a compound in your brake pad. And if you're looking for more performance, don't care so much about the wear, then you can go with this more aggressive Sport Series pad. So good stuff from R1. For talking purposes, we've pulled some calipers out to talk about on the bench. Otherwise, these would stay in the vehicle still with the hose attached. You don't want to break loose that brake line unless you absolutely have to, because then you're going to have to rebleed the entire system. So for talking purposes, I just want to show you. This is what a typical front caliper looks like. It's one giant piston inside there, And the other side is just a blank, and this whole thing floats in this little frame. It's held on by 2 big bolts right here, and the brake pads slip in and out, and they also have what they call this wear bar indicator. So on the R1 pads I was showing you, there's nothing. If you run them to the base plate, you do. These actually have a little metal piece here that will scratch and make a ton of noise if you've gotten the brake pad worn down that far. So that'll squeal and make you take it to the dealer or an auto repair shop, but it gets your attention. These have these little indicators or slots that you just simply slide these in, and you just put the 2 new pads in like that, and then you'll take this thing and carefully set it back down on the rotor. Sometimes the piston's pushed out and you need a C-clamp, so you just take a nice big C-clamp and you crank this down and you push that whole assembly back in so that you can get these over the rotor, because sometimes the rotor's thicker, especially if you've got worn pads that were on there, that piston's going to be sticking way out. So an important piece. This is typically a rear caliper. Again, just a miniature version of the front. So the majority of your braking power is in the front, so the rear can be very small. Now you can see this is going to take 2 much smaller bolts. These pads come in and out just a little bit differently. They have a little piece inside that helps them. You got to take out the outside one first, and it basically clips on, and then the inside one pops out, and it has some fingers that go inside the piston, so it knows, you know, where to stay, and it holds it in there. So this is actually a pretty nice setup, and it makes it very easy and quick to change brake pads. You can see it takes quite a bit of effort to get it back in there, and then same thing when you drop on the new pad for this, you've got to kind of get this started and then snap it in there. But that's all it takes to change the pads, and then again you just slip this right back on and put in the bolts. All right, I chose to go with an upgraded caliper system. So this, not only does it look nicer, but it has pistons that push from both sides. So opposed to this one where the piston's only on one side. Now it is a big piston, it's giant, that has a lot of clamping force, but I wanted pistons that go from both sides. And it's just a different style brake. This can apply a lot more pressure over a bigger brake pad, and these give you a lot better braking power. So if you're looking for even more braking power over the stock setup, this is a great way to go. So here's the brand new rotor. Now what I've got to do is determine whether this is driver or passenger. Again, I'm going to refer to the old one and take a quick look. So spin it around, right? You got to get the tabs on the proper side. So this is in fact the driver's side. Oh, and look, it looks like they updated the number of vanes inside. So we've got even more cooling power now. All right, I've found the appropriate replacement rotor. Tabs up. I'm going to go ahead and put the hat back on here. Like I told you, I'd mark the driver's side one so that I know I've got the right piece on here. And I'm going to go ahead and start putting each one of these little nuts on. These are special nuts because this is a very high heat application. This hardware is a special high temperature hardware that R1 provides with each of their brake packages. So I'm going to start each of these, and then I will use an electric impact to tighten these down, and then I will double check these with a torque wrench, and then it's ready to go on the vehicle. All right, if you're wondering what the torque spec would be for a given bolt, we've got this chart that you can download off the Tech Talk page on our website, and this will show you that for this hardware, which in my case is going to be 20 foot-pounds. So I'll torque each one of these to 20 foot-pounds. So you're just going to go around and tighten all these. There's a small lip on the edge that you want to make sure is seated. That's why I started all the bolts to center up this hat in the rotor. Come on. The Allen wrench fits in here pretty tight. And then, like I said, we're going to go back around and double check these with a torque wrench in just a second. Okay. All right, now that I'm done torquing each of the bolts, I'll go back through and actually put some torque seal right on each one. This is a little tube, kind of looks like Loctite, but it's thick and it dries hard. So if it breaks, then you know the bolt is loose. All right, it's time to put the rotor back on. Whether you're doing a two-piece rotor like this or the one-piece rotor, doesn't matter. You want to make sure this surface is clean. The rotor needs to sit all the way up on here, nice and smooth and flat, right? Otherwise, it's not going to roll around, and it's going to provide you additional wobble in here and friction going down the road. Okay, I've got my brand new brake pads, and to put them in the R1 caliper is actually very easy. They just slide right in. You literally just snap them in place like that, which is pretty nice. And I'm going to make sure that my brake line is going the proper way. I'm going to slide this over the top of the rotor. And remember, with brand new rotor and brand new pads, you may have to use the C-clamp to push the pistons back. In my case, I did not have to. I'm going to start my, my caliper bolts by hand. I've got red Loctite. I'm going to put a dab of this on there and thread these in there. So I got the top one started. I'm going to get this bottom one started. There we go. I'm going to pop that top one back out. I just used it to hold the caliper in place. I'm going to go ahead and put a little red Loctite on this guy. There we go. These, caliper bolts, so there's some on the adapter, which for a Dana 60 to this style needs an adapter. I red Loctite those as well to make sure that they do not back out. Then I'm going to thread these on. I always like to put bolts back in by hand. I want to know that the threads are started. If you use a power tool, it's too easy to just ram that thing in there and you don't know whether it really threaded in properly. This way I'm checking to make sure the pressure stays even the whole way. I want to know that that's nice and solid. And then I'm going to use the torque wrench to double check that. And I'm going to increase my rate here. And then we're going to torque those down. There we go. There we go. Okay, so now I will go ahead and finish torque sealing everything. I'm going to do all the rotor bolts. I'm going to do these back caliper bolts, and this is set. All right, now that I'm done with this side, I'm going to move over to the other side and do the exact same thing, get that all set. Then in the rear, you can see I've got a smaller box. The smaller box is the rear brake pads. I'm just going to replace the rear brake pads to match the new compound that I chose for the front brake pads. The rears don't work as hard. Honestly, the rotors back there practically last forever unless you damage them somehow, either banging them on a rock or getting something caught in like I did on this one. The rears last a long, long time, so you can simply change the pads and get something more aggressive. And in this case, I've gone to that heavy metallic that's really going to up. Now, I should mention, on the Terremoto, part of the reason I've gone to this much bigger brake system that's a 6-piston in the front and a 4-piston in the rear is because I've converted from a power assist to a full manual system. So meaning that when you push on the pedal, it's going directly here, right? Where in your Jeep, it probably goes from the pedal to a vacuum booster, and that's what they call power assist brakes. All right, we're ready to bleed the brakes. Now, when you bleed the brakes, you want to start at the farthest point away from the master cylinder, which would be the passenger side rear. Then you go to the driver's side rear, then the passenger side front, and then the driver's side front. So to do it, you find the little fitting, you pop it open if it's still got a rubber cap, you put this hose on, you crack it loose, and the fluid will go up and into the thing. You just do it for a few seconds. So the way it'll work is, I'll tell the person that's in the driver's seat to pump the brake until they feel pressure. Once they feel pressure, they hold it, and they'll tell me they're holding it. I'll crack this and close it again. And it'll just give us a quick spurt, and then they can release and pump it again. We'll do this a few times until I see perfectly clear fluid, no bubbles. Once that's done, I move to the other side of the caliper and do it over here too. You just want to keep this hose on here because brake fluid is highly corrosive. And again, pump it up, hold, crack it, close. Again, we're just looking for that spurt, and I'm watching for air bubbles. Once that's done, you close it off, you put the caps back on, and your brakes are going to feel better than they ever have. All right, on a standard caliper, yours is going to look like this. The fitting will be right here underneath a plastic or rubber cap also. Looks exactly the same. And you can see this is where the brake line will be coming in. You just have the one side. Again, you'll put the wrench on there, you'll put your rubber hose on, you'll pump up the brakes, crack it, tighten it again, and you don't overdo it. You know, this is a small fitting, so this just needs to be snug. You do not want to crank these. And you know, once you're all done bleeding, then I usually just put a little bit of grease on each of the lug nuts or the studs and put the wheel back on and re-torque the wheel, and you're good to go. All right, this is to talk about how to mount our STK 5755. This is our double shear high steer kit. Now this comes with two 8-inch long grade 8 bolts with unitorque nuts and two tube spacers. Now these spacers ultimately get cut and you split the difference of what you need on your knuckles, okay? So what I'm gonna do is talk about how you go about this and in theory what you're trying to do. So you're gonna take your factory 60 knuckle. This is drilled right now to have a taper inside of it. You are going to drill the taper out with a 3/4 inch drill bit. Now, I've gone down to my local hardware store and picked this up. These are about 20 bucks. But what I recommend is that you use one of those step bits. I like these a lot better. They don't tend to grab as much, and they're really easy to drill a taper out. So if you don't have your choice, you can even do it in steps in different drill sizes if you have to, because if you try and put a big bit in like this, it's gonna grab and it makes it really hard to get that drilled through. Once that's drilled through, what your options are is this. I went and bought, they have these at every hardware store, you know, a long piece of plated, like zinc plated rod, or you can get a longer 3/4 inch bolt, but you need to grind it so it has a tip on it, because you're going to be using this as a transfer punch. So once the knuckle is drilled, you're going to bolt on the high steer arm firmly in place, and you got to bolt this down really good, because you're going to put this transfer punch through the lower portion, and you're going to hit this up on here, and that's going to determine, I don't have it bolted in the right spot, there we go. That's going to determine right where you drill the hole, okay? And it is not right even in this radius. So it's very important that you get this drilled, you hit this with a hammer and transfer that punch in there. Then you pull the arm back off where it's been transfer punched, and you drill another 3/4 inch hole through the arm. Then you'll be ready to use your new bolt double shear bolt kit, and hold this all together. You want to get your tie rod way up out of the way. You can see the factory knuckle down here, and normally your factory tie rod's bolted on the bottom or the top of this cast in ear, and a lot of the aftermarket guys want to move those up, but what you really need to do is double shear it, okay? So many people put on a high steer arm, but then they just bolt the tie rod to this. That's not enough. That'll break these bolts off and you're going to be stuck on the side of the trail. GenRight offers a kit. It's called the STK 5755. It comes with 2 grade 8 bolts, Unitorque nuts, all the washers, everything you need, and thick wall tubing spacers to go over the bolt to allow you to suspend the tie rod right in between at the desired height you want. So typically the lower one is a little bit longer than the top one, and it all has to do with where your ram mount is and the ability to clear everything on your steering when it's fully compressed. So you balance out the tie rod right in the middle. It's double sheared, it's super strong, and trust me, this is a setup we've run for many, many years, raced King of the Hammers, driven every trail around the United States, and this setup holds up. Now, once you've got it done, we also, to keep the tie rod from twisting when you've got your ram on there, we clock the tie rod ends, or the heims, opposite of each other. So we rotate it all the way, we lock the lock nut, and on the other side, we rotate it the other way and lock the lock nut, so this bar does not twist. All right, hopefully all of that was very informative for you. Thank you again for watching. We really appreciate it. If you liked what you saw, please like, subscribe, share it with your friends. We'd really appreciate it. And we will see you next Tuesday with a whole nother Tech Talk.